The first major war between China and Japan was in 1895. For 6 months, the Japanese Imperial Army kept pummeling the Qing Dynasty army at islands which both kingdoms claimed. Now, this was the first major war fought by Japan after the Meiji Restoration, and it was clear that the Japanese forces were far superior to the aging army of the Qing Dynasty. Eventually, it led to the loss of Korea and islands around it as a tributary state to the Qing Empire. Japan continued to rule these lands for another 50 years till the end of World War II. This 1895 war, known as the First Sino-Japanese War, it completely changed the power dynamic between Japan and China in East Asia. For years now, Japan's defense forces and their supremacy was not challenged because, also remember, it's a treaty ally to the United States. But now, that is changing with the rise of the People's Liberation Army of China. And of course, its aggressive maneuvers that we're seeing from the East China Sea to the South China Sea. Also, the Russian special military operation in Ukraine has spooked Tokyo. In Japan and beyond, there is a big debate going on whether it's time to change the Japanese constitution and to rearm the Japanese army to take on an aggressive China and an aggressive Russia. China swore after the 1895 war to never ever face a similar embarrassment. This week on Crux Decode, we will look at this ongoing debate in Japan, who is fueling it, and what may be the result of this debate, whether it will change the Japanese constitution and whether the Japanese self-defense forces will now rethink and maybe even attack first. Now, a special panel on national security within the ruling party in Japan, the Liberal Democratic Party, has drawn up a draft urging the government of Fumio Kishida to provide the Japanese self-defense forces with what they call counter-attack capability. Now, what this means is that the Japanese army and its ability to attack an enemy's command and control system as well as its military bases. As of right now, Japan's army is only for self-defense. In fact, Japan has ostensibly put a no first attack policy over the last 70 years. Now, if this draft that's suggested by the ruling party, by the administration of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, then such a new counter-force strike capability will be a big departure from Japan's stated policy since World War II. At the end of World War II, Japan reoriented its defenses to just protecting the state and the people if it were attacked. The nation even adopted a pacifist constitution, inserting Article 9 in its constitution saying that an army or defense forces can only be kept for defensive purposes, not for attacking purposes. But this latest move by the ruling party comes at a time when there is a worsening security environment all around Japan. And that is forcing Tokyo to look more deeply at its military preparedness. China's armed forces are growing rapidly. They're often sending either reconnaissance missions or even fighter jets close to Japan's maritime boundaries. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also raised renewed security concerns in the Pacific. Russia, remember, is a Pacific nation as well as a nation which has a Pacific coastline and a long-standing territorial dispute with Japan. So that is causing some consternation in Tokyo as well. In addition to both China and Russia, and if those threats were not big enough, there is also the growing nuclear and missile threats from North Korea. North Korea even recently tested its intercontinental ballistic missile, capable of hitting Japan within minutes. Now, all of these have inevitably forced Tokyo to pursue the capability to hit back at enemy bases and to respond to either a ballistic missile or a cruise missile attack. The committee of the ruling LDP party in Japan is headed by former Japanese Defense Minister Mr. Itsunori Onodera. He says that the government needs to improve its deterrence capabilities by acquiring the ability to hit first. Because according to Because of rapid advances in missile technology, for example, hypersonic glide vehicles, it's going to be extremely difficult for Japan to defend itself with the current interception systems that it has. Now, one other thing that this particular paper, this draft, is proposing to do is to raise Japan's share of defense spending to 2% of GDP. Remember, this is in keeping with the defense spending targets of more than 2% of GDP for all NATO countries. Even though Japan is not a NATO member, it is a treaty ally of the United States. Japan is also hoping to realize that its budget meets a level that is necessary to fundamentally reinforce its defensive capabilities. In fact, Japan's current defense minister, Kishi Nobuo, said in January that Japan's ratio of defense spending to GDP in the fiscal year 2021 had already reached 1.25% based on NATO standards. But there could also be a domestic reason for Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. There are crucial upper house elections that are due in July of this year. He has to win that to continue to keep power. He's also hoping to use this enhanced defense strategy paper as a main campaign point for that election. In fact, increasingly, surveys in Japan are showing that a larger and larger number of Japanese citizens are in favor of changing the pacifist nature of its constitution and also rearming the self-defense forces. Also, later this year, the Kishida government will be releasing what's called the National Security Strategy Paper. It'll have to be adopted collectively by the Japanese parliament, the Diet, and a recent report also revealed that the Japanese air defense forces had scrambled their fighter jets over 1,000 times in the year 2021. Now, this was in response to foreign military aircraft that was approaching Japan's airspace. That was the second highest total number of scrambles recorded in any single year since the Japanese Air Defense Forces began operations in 1958. Now, that gives you an indication of how much regional tensions have been rising and how worried Tokyo is because of these rising regional tensions. In fact, the Ministry of Defense in Tokyo had said in a statement back on the 15th of April that the overall number of scrambles was up by 279 from the previous year. So increasingly, the number of scrambles has been going up over the past few years. The Ministry of Defense also said that out of the foreign aircraft, only 2 Russian aircraft violated Japanese airspace. A majority of the scrambles were in response to Chinese aircraft. The latest announcement by Tokyo comes amid heightened tensions between Japan and its neighboring countries like Russia and China. Remember, Japan contests the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands with China in the East China Sea, and also the Kuril Islands, or the Southern Territories as it's known, in the North Pacific Ocean. So clearly, the government of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has both its security concerns cut out and perhaps also it's using that for domestic political reasons.